so Pat Ament saw me over there, and he came and got me, and he brought me over to that big table, and he said, "This is Jamie Logan, or Jim Logan then. This is Jim Logan, and he can climb 5'10". And I was like, and then after that, I could sit at the big table because I could climb 5'10".
This is Climbing Gold. Let's just dive in. Can you just start with your name and who you are and what you do?
I'm Jamie Logan, and I am or was an architect. I'm retired now. I designed a lot of climbing gyms, and I've been a rock climber for 66 years. It's a pretty long time.
I think, we've interviewed a lot of stone masters and various old climbers. I don't know if anybody's been climbing more than 66 years.
Well,
Have
I'm kind of the oldest person still going, I think, basically. When I was 11 years old, I loved climbing up trees and buildings and rocks and everything. And then these 10th Mountain Division guys in my hometown of Midland, Texas, were going to take me rock climbing, and they took me down to, we found some cliffs down in the Davis Mountains, and they tried to lead and they couldn't remember how to do it. And I said, "Well, can I?" And so they gave me, so I tied a World War II climbing rope around my waist, and I took a sling with a bunch of World War II soft iron pitons and a hammer and some oval steel carabiners. And I climbed up some corner, pounding pins in. And when I got to the top, I said, "What do I do now?" And they said, "Pound in a piton and clip a carabiner into it, and we'll lower you down." And that was, so I figure I can count that right. I actually led a pitch.
I'm I'm amazed you survived. Wait, and
Well,
so
else
you were,
we didn't fall a lot in those days.
but
So
you were 11 years old
I was 11 years old, yeah.
when you learned how to hammer pins?
Well, I didn't learn. I just pounded them one in, or two or five,
Well,
whatever.
yeah. That's crazy though, because I mean, I've been climbing for years before I hammered my first pin, like literally 15 years probably. I've been climbing before I nailed the piton. But this is just totally different eras.
Well, that's how we had were pitons.
Yeah,
So
no, of course. But so what, like, so back that up a little bit. Like, how did you get into climbing in the middle of Texas? I mean, the army, like, there was rock nearby, and who let an 11-year-old just wander out with some army guys to learn how to rock climb?
well, they were old. They were guys from the Second World War who now are oil guys. So
So they were like recreational rock climbing. They were going out like
yeah,
for
they hadn't
pleasure
rock climbed since being in the 10th Mountain Division in 1944.
since storming the Alps or something, or
Yeah,
like,
exactly. And they had still had the rope and the stuff from storming the Alps, and so and
oh
they
wow.
and they had this idea that they were still could be climbers, which didn't really work out since I was the only one who actually climbed anything,
What
really.
year was this?
1958. I
Man,
just wanted to
it's
be a climber. I climbed trees, I climbed buildings. I would uh, take a clothesline rope and wrap it around a tree and throw it down a cliff, and then have my little brother hold the end of it, and then I would tie it around actually, no, I made a belt out of leather from the Tandy Leather Company, and I had clips on it, and I tied the rope into the clips on the side of the belt. And the only thing about this is I only weighed like 60 pounds, so it all sort of worked, kind of. Mostly I never,
dude.
that's really what it comes
It
down to.
But so how did you work your way from that kind of scrappy introduction in climbing to all the climbing achievements that you had over your long long life? Like what
Well,
how did you work your way to Boulder, and how did you get into real climbing, like what we know you for?
yeah. So I was a real screw up in school, and
Really?
yeah, total F's and D's and bad grades. I talked my parents, school counselor, talked my parents into sending me away to school. And so I was able to go to Fountain Valley School in Colorado Springs. And then they said that I could start a climbing team, climbing group club. And so I found a faculty sponsor, and we hired this guy, Gary Ziegler, and he was a pretty good rock climber, actually. And he took us out once a week to go rock climbing. And I'm the only person he ever let lead. He let me lead crack parallel, I remember. And last year I was down in Colorado Springs, and I climbed crack parallel, and it's like bolted. And I led it when I was 16 with pitons and no bolts, like 4 pieces of gear or something. But anyway, so I loved climbing, and I was pretty good at it. And so by the end of Fountain Valley, I knew the mechanics of rock climbing. I knew how to hip belay. I knew how to tie a bolt on a coil, pound pins in, take them out, all that stuff. So then I went to see you, and I flunked out because I was climbing every day, basically. And yeah, and every time, I mean, I climbed with my friends that first year. Um, and every time we wanted to go up a grade, I had to lead it. And there wasn't a guidebook. It was just, I went to El Dorado and I walked along and I found a bolt. My first climb I ever did in El Dorado, I saw a bolt up on the wall. So I had my friend belay me and I climbed up to the bolt and kept going. And that climb is now 11B, I think, or something.
Dude.
But I didn't know. I'm just like, whatever. This is a place other people have climbed. I'm going up.
That is not my approach to rock climbing. If you just walk into the area, you see one random bolt out of face, you'd be like, "Oh God, let's look at
There's
the
a
topo."
couple of old soft iron fixed pins too.
But
So
that is an interesting reminder of an earlier era in climbing when there's way less information, there's less knowledge, there are fewer people doing it, and so it is just all way more adventurous.
yeah, there was, and I mean, we would go up to Estes Park and climb places in Lumpy Ridge, and you would just see a corner and you'd climb up it, and somewhere on the second pitch there'd be an old Harvey T. Carter piton pounded in. You'd be like, oh, somebody else has been here before. That's cool. And so it was very exploratory all the time, kind of. Then what happened is uh, I needed a climbing partner in the summer, but in summer 1966. And I went into the hiking club office at CU, which was the epicenter of climbing then, kind of. And I said, I need a climbing partner. And the guy said, well, do you want to guide or do you want to take classes or what do you want? And I said, no, I need people to climb. I know how to climb. And he said, how hard can you climb? And I said, well, I can lead 5'8" and follow 5'9". And he said, kid, if you were that good, I'd know who you were. That's what he said. And not too long after that, I met Larry Dalkey, and he was guiding on the third platter, and I was just soloing up and down the third platter. And he said, I said, I need some people to climb with. And he said, well, Wayne Goss wants people to climb with. You should call him. And so I found out how to find Wayne, and Wayne became my lifeline climbing partner. And so I said, oh, I want to do a climb. And he said, okay, well, let's go do the naked edge, which had only been done 4 times. I'm like, okay. And so off we went and we aided our way up the naked edge. And at the very top, I ran out of gear, pitons, and I set up a belay in this crack. And I had one 2-inch bong and then a knife blade behind a 1/2-inch thick flake. And that's all I had in because that's all the gear I had left. And so he climbed up to me and he looked up and he said, is that the anchor? And I said, yeah. He's on Jumars, and he just immediately pounded a pin in right in front of him, tied the rope to it. But we lived through it and we did the 5th descent of the naked edge. And then all of a sudden I had climbing partners. Actually, not really until later, a little later, sometime that summer, I drove up to Castle Rock and in my cowboy boots and my Plymouth sedan, and there were these 2 people climbing, and I got all excited and I ran up and I said, what are you guys doing? And they said, we're trying to free climb this route. And it was Royal Robbins and Panamint.
Hmm.
And they were trying to free climb this 511. And I said,
Is that
I try.
country boy? Which route?
Um, I don't remember the name of it. It's a little short route over on the left side of Castle Rock. It's
Okay.
11B now, I think.
Okay.
And so they said, are you a climber? And I said, yeah. So I went down and got my climbing shoes, my Kronhofer climbing shoes out of the car. And, they were leather shoes with vibro soles. And I put them on and I tied my bullet on a coil and they had a top rope on it. And I proceeded to on-site this thing that they were projecting. And they were kind of amazed. And then the next day, I was at the university at the restaurant at the student center, and I was sitting by myself over on the side because I didn't know anybody. And in the middle of the restaurant was this big round table, and that's where the real climbers sat. And so Pat Emmett saw me over there, and he came and got me, and he brought me over to that big table, and he said, this is Jamie Logan, or Jim Logan then. This is Jim Logan, and he can climb 5'10". And I was like, And then after that, I could sit at the big table because I could climb back down.
You made it. It's a good reminder that even in the 1960s, there's always some random kid that's going to walk up and onsite your project. You're like,
Exactly.
even the professional climbers of their day, Royal Robbins is like, oh, I'm just doing something rad out here, and then some random kid shows up and onsites the project. Like, it's good to know that that's been a universal experience in climbing since the very beginning. That there's
There's
always some
always, no
random,
matter how good you think you are,
yeah,
there's always some
exactly.
random kid.
Yeah, there's always some random guy showing up in cowboy boots about to send your proj. You're
Exactly.
like, oh man, that's
Yeah.
crazy.